I want to begin with something I observed so consistently across my decades of practice that I eventually stopped filing it under curiosity and began filing it under certainty. It is this: the moment a woman genuinely lets go, not performs letting go, not decides to appear as though she has let go while continuing to monitor every signal from the periphery of his silence, but truly, interiorly, completely releases her grip on the outcome she has been organizing her emotional life around. Something happens in the man she has released her grip on. Something immediate. Something that does not wait for a phone call or a conversation or any form of visible communication between them to transmit itself across whatever distance has accumulated between their lives. He feels it, not metaphorically. Not in the loose and poetic sense that people sometimes use when they want to say something true, but cannot locate the precise mechanism of its truth. I mean it in the most clinically serious sense I am capable of offering. He feels it in the body first, before the mind has any adequate framework for what it is feeling or why. A shift in the atmosphere of something he cannot name, but has been, without any conscious awareness of the monitoring nonetheless. A change in a pressure he did not know he was relying upon, until the moment it was no longer there. And in the hours that follow that feeling, in the quiet and the confusion, and the entirely involuntary turning of his attention back towards you, with an urgency that bypasses the persona entirely, begins something that I spent considerable years trying to map with the precision it deserved. I never found a cleaner map than the one the unconscious itself provided. But before I take you into his interior, before I show you what is happening inside him in those first hours after genuine release and why it moves with the speed that it does, I must first take you somewhere that most people who study this phenomenon consistently fail to go. I must take you into what letting go actually is, because in 40 years of sitting with women who were attempting it, I observed that the most common version of letting go that was being practiced in the name of the real thing bore very little resemblance to the genuine article, and the difference between the imitation and the authentic version is not a small difference. It is the difference between a performance that changes nothing in the interior of either person and an act of genuine psychological release that changes everything. The imitation is what I came to call strategic withdrawal. It arrives dressed in the language of dignity and self-respect, which is how it manages to deceive even the person practicing it. It says, "I am done reaching." It says, "I will not contact him." It says, "I am choosing myself now, and I am moving forward." And all of these statements may be entirely sincere at the level of conscious intention. The woman saying them may believe them completely, but underneath the conscious intention, in the part of the interior that I spent my career learning to listen to more carefully than the part that speaks in complete sentences, something else is happening. The attention has not moved. The monitoring has not ceased. Every hour of the day, beneath the composed surface of a person who has decided to let go, the interior is doing its quiet and exhausting surveillance, watching for his signal, waiting for his move, measuring the silence for any change in texture that might indicate he is about to break it. That is not letting go. That is waiting with better posture, and he can feel the difference. This is the part that requires the most careful explanation, because the mechanism by which he feels it is not the one the rational mind would reach for first. It is not that he has some conscious awareness of being monitored. It is not that he detects the surveillance through any ordinary channel of communication or observation. What he detects, what the unconscious registers with a sensitivity that the conscious mind in both of you consistently underestimates, is the energetic signature of continued attachment, the particular quality of attention that comes with being held in someone's interior, whether they have decided to be quiet about it or not. I wrote at length about the reality of the unconscious as a communicative field, not in the mystical sense, though I never dismissed the mystical with the confidence that some of my contemporaries brought to that dismissal. In the psychological sense, the sense that two people who have achieved genuine emotional intimacy, who have, even briefly, touched something real in each other beneath the level of persona and social performance, continue to exist in each other's interior landscape in ways that are not severed by silence or distance, or the conscious decision of either party to move on. The connection does not require contact to remain active. It requires only that it was real. And if it was real, then what passes between the two interiors continues to pass in the wordless language of the unconscious, regardless of what the surface behavior of either person is doing. Which means that strategic withdrawal, however sincerely it is practiced at the conscious level, transmits nothing different to his interior than the reaching did. Because the interior has not changed, only the behavior has changed, and behavior, in the economy of the unconscious, is the least significant currency in circulation. This is why the imitation never produces what the genuine article produces, and the genuine article, true letting go, the kind that originates not in a decision made on the surface, but in a shift that occurs at the deepest level of the interior, produces something in him that the imitation never reaches, something that moves through him with a speed and an intensity that has, in my clinical observation, no adequate explanation outside of the framework I spent my life building. Something that will tell you more about the truth of what existed between you than anything he said or did not say during the entire preceding season of distance and silence. But what that something is, and precisely where inside him it originates, and why it surfaces with the immediacy that it does rather than arriving gradually the way most psychological processes arrive, that requires us to go somewhere together that will ask more of your honesty than anything I have said so far. Stay with me. If what I have offered here has already begun to settle something in you that needed settling, share this with someone who is still practicing the imitation and has not yet found their way to the real thing. Follow along, because what I am about to show you about the interior of a man who suddenly, without warning, can no longer feel you holding on, is the part of this that changes everything. I treated a man in the middle period of my career, whom I will describe to you, not because his case was unusual, but because it was, in the most instructive sense, entirely ordinary. He was a professional man, composed, articulate in the way that men who have spent considerable energy constructing a functional persona tend to be articulate, fluently, on the subjects they have decided are safe, and with a particular and practiced vagueness on every subject that approaches the territory they have agreed with themselves never to enter. He came to me not because of the woman. He came to me, as men of his type almost always do, with a presenting complaint that had nothing to do with what was actually wrong. Occupational stress, difficulty sleeping, a general and unspecific sense, he said, that something was off, though he could not locate the something with any precision. It took 4 sessions before the woman entered the conversation, and when she did, she entered it the way the most significant things always entered my consulting room, sideways, embedded in something that was presented as a minor detail, mentioned almost as an afterthought in the middle of a sentence about something else entirely. He said, almost in passing, that someone he had been involved with had recently stopped reaching out. He said it with the careful neutrality of a man who has rehearsed the neutrality specifically because the subject does not feel neutral at all. And then he moved immediately to the next sentence, as though the information had been fully delivered and required no further examination. I did not move to the next sentence with him. I have learned, across more years of this work than I sometimes care to count, that the things a person moves past most quickly in conversation are almost always the things most worth stopping beside. So I stopped, and I asked him, with the particular quality of unhurried attention that I tried to bring to every moment in that room that announced itself as significant, to tell me more about what it had felt like. Not what he thought about it, not what he had decided it meant, what it had felt like in the body in the first hours after he registered that the reaching had genuinely stopped. He was quiet for a long time, and then he said something that I have carried with me since that afternoon in Kusnacht as one of the cleaner and more honest descriptions I ever received from a man attempting to articulate an interior experience he had no prepared language for. He said it felt like a sound stopping, not a dramatic sound, not something he had been consciously aware of hearing, but a low and constant and ever-present hum that he had so thoroughly integrated into the background of his daily experience that he had ceased to register it as a separate thing, and whose cessation was therefore not a relief, as the cessation of an unwanted sound should theoretically be, but a disorientation so complete that it took him the better part of 2 days to identify what had changed. He had not known he was listening for her. That is the sentence I want you to hold, because it contains, in its quiet and unprepared honesty, the entire mechanism of what I am attempting to explain to you about what happens inside a man the moment genuine letting go occurs on the other side of the connection. He had not known he was listening. The monitoring was not conscious. The awareness of her presence in his interior landscape, the low and constant registering of her continued attention, her continued orientation toward him, her continued holding of him in the active and living center of her emotional world, had been so thoroughly absorbed into the background architecture of his daily experience that it had become, to his conscious mind, simply part of the atmosphere, until it wasn't. Now I want to ask you something, and I want you to resist the first answer that rises, because the first answer is almost always the one the conscious mind has already prepared for exactly this kind of question. When you imagine truly letting go of him, not the performance of it, not the strategic version I described in our last conversation, but the genuine interior release, the actual reorientation of your attention away from him and back toward the full landscape of your own life. What is the feeling that arrives alongside that imagining? Sit with that. Write it in the comments if you are willing to be that honest in this moment. Because what you find in that feeling is not about him. It is about what holding on has been doing for you, what function it has been serving in your own interior economy, what it has been protecting you from having to feel or face or sit with in the quiet of a life that is no longer organized around the project of waiting for him to return. That is the question beneath the question, and it matters more than any answer he could give you. Because here is what I observed in the man sitting across from me in that session, and in the many men who followed him with variations of the same story, wearing different details. The moment she genuinely let go, the moment the hum ceased, the moment the atmospheric presence of her continued orientation toward him was no longer detectable in the background of his interior. What surfaced in him was not relief, was not the comfortable settling of a man who has been waiting for the pursuit to end so that he can return to his preferred emotional temperature, in peace. What surfaced was the full and unmediated weight of what he had been using her pursuit to avoid feeling. The need, the hunger, the specific and irreplaceable quality of being held in genuine regard by a person who had seen something in him that his persona had spent years making sure remained invisible. All of it, which the steady background hum of her attention had been allowing him to keep at a manageable distance, to acknowledge vaguely, to feel partially, to approach and retreat from on his own terms and his own timeline, was suddenly, without the buffer of her pursuit, to organize it behind, present in its full and undiminished weight, and it arrived with an urgency that the persona had no prepared protocol for managing. This is the part that most explanations of this phenomenon miss entirely. They describe his reaching out as a response to her pulling away, as a simple dynamic of pursuit reversing direction when the original pursuer changes course. That description is not wrong exactly, but it is so incomplete as to be, in its incompleteness, misleading, because it locates the cause of his movement in her behavior, in what she did or stopped doing on the surface. And the surface, as I have spent my entire career arguing, is the least instructive place to look for the cause of anything that matters in human psychology. The cause is not in her behavior. The cause is in what her behavior stopped doing to his interior. And what it stopped doing, the specific psychological function that her pursuit had been serving inside him without either of them having any conscious awareness of the arrangement, is what we are going to examine next. Because when you understand that function with full clarity, you will understand not only why he feels it instantly when you genuinely let go, but why the feeling, when it arrives, is not something his persona can negotiate with or manage or rebuild its walls around. It arrives from somewhere the walls were never built to reach. I want to be precise about something that imprecise language has consistently obscured in every popular discussion of this phenomenon that I have encountered. When I say that her pursuit was serving a psychological function inside him, I am not saying he was using her consciously. I am not describing a man who sat in full awareness of the arrangement and made a calculated decision to accept her attention while offering insufficient return. Conscious manipulation, in my clinical experience, is far rarer than the popular imagination supposes. What is not rare, what is in fact so common as to constitute something close to a universal pattern in men who have not done the interior work that genuine intimacy requires, is the unconscious outsourcing of emotional regulation. Let me explain precisely what I mean by that. Every human being requires, at the most fundamental level of psychological functioning, a sense that they are real to someone, not admired, not desired, though desire has its own legitimate place in the economy of human need. Real. Seen in the specific and irreducible particularity of who they actually are beneath the persona, held in the genuine regard of another consciousness that has looked at what lives beneath the surface and has not retreated from what it found there. This need does not disappear because a man's formation taught him it was inadmissible. It relocates. It finds indirect methods of being met that do not require the man to consciously acknowledge that the meeting is occurring or that the need existed in the first place. Her pursuit was one of those indirect methods. Every reach she made toward him, every message, every softening, every careful recalibration of her own behavior in the direction of what she imagined he needed, was, at the level of his unconscious, registering as confirmation. Not of her love exactly, though her love was present in it, confirmation of his own significance, evidence arriving continuously and without requiring anything vulnerable from him in return, that he mattered to a consciousness that had seen enough of him to keep reaching, despite the distance he maintained. He was, without knowing he was doing it, feeding a fundamental psychological need through the least psychologically costly method available to him. Her effort, her pursuit, her continued orientation toward him. And this is the arrangement that genuine letting go dismantles, not dramatically, not with confrontation or ultimatum or any of the conscious and surface-level interventions that change behavior without touching the interior. It dismantles it by simply withdrawing the supply, by removing quietly and completely and without announcement the indirect confirmation that his unconscious had been relying upon to keep the deepest need at a manageable distance from his conscious awareness. And the moment the supply is withdrawn, the need loses its intermediary. It can no longer be fed indirectly. It can no longer be kept at the comfortable distance of something that is being addressed without being acknowledged. It surfaces fully, with the particular and disorienting urgency of something that has been suppressed for long enough that suppression is no longer a viable management strategy, and it surfaces oriented with a specificity that the unconscious always brings to these moments, toward the precise source that had been meeting it, toward her, not toward the idea of her, not toward the comfort of her pursuit as an abstract confirmation of his worth, toward her, specifically. The particular quality of her seeing, the specific texture of what it felt like to exist in her genuine regard. These are not interchangeable. The unconscious does not accept substitutes in these moments with any of the flexibility that the conscious mind, in its more rational hours, might suggest should be possible. He reaches for her because the need inside him has a her-shaped resolution, and nothing else will do. This is what I want you to understand with full clarity before we move into what happens next in his interior. what the reaching costs him, what it requires him to confront about himself that the entire preceding season of managed distance allowed him to avoid, and why that confrontation is the most significant thing that has happened inside him since the connection began. Because the reaching is not the end of this story. It is, in the most precise psychological sense I can offer, the beginning of the only part of the story that was ever going to matter. What he does with what surfaces when he reaches, that is where we are going next. The reaching, when it comes, will not look the way you imagined it would look during the long months of waiting. I want to prepare you for that with the honesty that I always believed was the only genuine form of kindness available in a consulting room, or anywhere else that real things are being discussed between people who are willing to be serious with each other. You imagined, in the quiet hours when the longing was loudest and the mind was constructing its preferred version of resolution, that it would arrive with clarity, with words adequate to the weight of everything that had accumulated in the silence. With an apology that named specifically what it was apologizing for, and an explanation that finally made the withdrawal make sense, and a present so unambiguous that the question of whether he meant it would not even form in your mind, because the answer would already be visible in everything about how he showed up. It will not arrive that way. It will arrive imperfectly. It will arrive with the particular awkwardness of a man who is attempting to move toward something his entire psychological architecture was constructed to move away from, and who does not yet have the interior vocabulary for what he is trying to say, because the interior vocabulary is precisely what the persona spent years ensuring he would never need to develop. It will arrive as a message that says too little and means far more than it says. As a call at an hour that tells you more than the words of the call itself, as a presence that appears in your vicinity with a casualness so transparently constructed that the construction itself is the most honest thing about it. He will not arrive fluent in the language of his own interior. He will arrive as a man who has just discovered, in the most disorienting and inescapable way available to the human psyche, that he has an interior, and that it has been trying to reach you since long before he found the courage to let it. This imperfection is not a warning sign. I want to be precise about that. In my experience, the men who arrived at genuine emotional availability did not arrive polished. They arrived undone. They arrived with the particular and unmistakable quality of someone who has been through something in the interior that has rearranged the furniture in ways they have not yet fully mapped. The polished arrivals, the ones with prepared speeches and carefully constructed explanations, and the smooth confidence of a man who has rehearsed the moment. Those arrivals I learned, across the years, to trust far less than the stumbling ones, because Polish, in these moments, is almost always the persona, reasserting its management of a situation that the genuine self has not yet been allowed to lead. The stumbling is the genuine self, and the genuine self, when it finally surfaces in a man who has spent a significant portion of his adult life keeping it carefully submerged, is not a finished thing. It is not the resolved and emotionally available version of him that you perhaps believed in the earliest moments of the connection. He already was. It is something rawer than that, something that will require, if what is being built between you is going to be built on a foundation that fear did not construct, a quality of patience and clarity from you that the waiting season has, whether you recognized it as preparation or not, been building in your interior all along, because the waiting was not only doing its work in him. I have said this before, and I return to it now, because it is the truth that I most want to leave with you, the one that I believe matters more than any other single thing I have offered across this conversation. The letting go. When it was genuine, when it originated not in strategy or performance, but in the actual and complete reorientation of your interior attention away from him and back toward the full and unlived landscape of your own life, that letting go was not only the catalyst for what began to surface in him, it was the completion of something in you that the chasing had been preventing from finishing. The chasing kept you oriented outward, toward him, toward his signals and his silences, and the constantly shifting calculus of what his behavior meant about the status of the connection and the security of your place in his interior. And while you were oriented outward with that consuming and exhausting totality, the interior work that this season was always also asking of you was going undone. The examination of the animus and what it had been projecting, the confrontation with the shadow, and what the specific quality of your attachment to this particular man was trying to show you about the oldest and most persistent unfinished story in your own psychology. The development of the capacity to be alone in the full and inhabited sense, not lonely, not waiting, but genuinely present to yourself in a way that does not require another person's attention to feel real. That capacity, I observed across my entire career, is not built in comfort. It is built in exactly the kind of season you have been living through, in the silence, in the waiting, in the repeated confrontation with the limits of what you can control, and the gradual, reluctant, ultimately liberating surrender to what you cannot. You have been built in this season, whether you knew the building was occurring or not, and what has been built is not a woman who is now better positioned to receive him when he returns, though that is also true. What has been built is a woman who no longer requires his return to be whole, who has discovered, in the interior quiet that follows the cessation of the chase, that the self she was so focused on having him see was worth seeing all along, that the love she was so focused on having him confirm was real all along, not because he confirmed it, but because she finally, in the stillness after the letting go, turned the quality of attention she had been directing entirely outward back toward the interior, where it had always been most needed. That is the arrival that matters most, not his, yours, and if he comes, when he comes, imperfectly and undone, and with the stumbling authenticity of a man whose interior has finally overridden the persona's management protocols, you will meet him, not as the person who was diminished by the waiting, but as the person who was completed by it. That meeting, between two people who have both done the interior work that genuine love requires, is not the reunion of two people returning to what they were. It is the first real meeting of two people who are finally, for the first time, actually present enough to see each other clearly. That is what I observed, in the best cases, at the end of the long and difficult seasons that brought people through my door exhausted and left them, eventually, with something they could not have built any other way. Not a relationship rescued, a foundation laid, for the first time, correctly. If these words have reached the place inside you that most needed reaching today, share this with someone who is still in the middle of the letting go and has not yet seen what the other side of it holds. Follow along, because the conversation that changes everything is always the one you are finally willing to have with yourself. And you, beloved, are already further along in that conversation than you know.